we have benefited from staff coming from all over the world to work for us for a long time, really. Some of that through the nature of the work that we do, attracting people, and then through deliberate programs of recruitment in countries overseas over the years. And although Cambridge itself is, Cambridgeshire is not the most diverse county in the country, we have a very diverse workforce with 30% of our staff coming from a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic background, which is high for our area. So this is one of our trust objectives, number 3, which is to offer a positive staff experience. And I've highlighted the bit that says our objective in terms of the best staff experience, where staff can feel valued for what they bring to the trust. So a very explicit commitment that we want to make sure that staff feel valued for what they personally bring to the trust. And we felt that we had been, over the last number of years, been trying to do a lot of work in that area, particularly supporting staff who've come from overseas to work with us or are educated elsewhere in the world. And we've recently received went through the accreditation process, the NHS one for Pastoral Award. So over the number of years, they've done a lot of work in things and getting people ready to come to us, and then when they come, feeling welcomed. But an issue came to light, or was highlighted, and I'll talk a bit in the next slide about how that came to light, that showed that rather than that objective and feeling for value for what they bring to the trust, we came to realise that the reality was very different. And in a very simple way is that we were staff who trained and worked overseas prior to coming to work with us were being placed in a different starting salary than UK trained staff. And that had been our practice for a number of years. And we had been kind of unthinkingly doing it. There was a rationale for it at the time that built up over the years. And the role of it's now called the Race Equality Network as of yesterday, because it's renamed itself and relaunched yesterday at a brilliant event around Windrush Day, and have played a really important role in the trust in identifying and bringing issues to the fore. And they had an important role in exposing and questioning the inequity that had been existing for a number of years. So it was participants in that network who had flagged the question and been questioning, why were we doing this? And they were staff who had come with, particularly recruited a lot into critical care. It's a very big unit, and they had years of experience in other countries, but they weren't being placed on the same point in the scale as somebody who had UK experience, equivalent level of UK experience. And, they'd been asking it, they'd asked it for a while, and the answer had always been, well, that's our practice. And obviously I think the reasons, I don't really know why, are lost in the mist of time, but I think it was to do with the fact that unless you're trained at Papworth and have worked there for a number of years, you've not really got the same level of expertise if you've worked elsewhere. So I think that was part of it. But the network took this up and had a discussion about it, and Onika and I were part of that, and it made us think. The next sort of strand that I'd like to just talk about is about being anti-racist. So being anti-racist, as I understand it to mean, is about being prepared to acknowledge and take action to rectify systemic racial inequalities. And that saying, that is the way we've always done it, is racist. It's not anti-racist. It's racist because you're not examining your actions. You're not taking accountability for it and saying, I lead in an organisation that's been doing this, and that's just the way it is, and it's too difficult to change, and it'll, too many issues about precedent, etc., etc. But we, in the East of England HRD network, had about 2 years ago worked with the regional office, and I can see 10 days on the call was part of that regional team led by Harper Hockley, had worked with the East of England HR Directors Network, which I co-chair, to focus on developing an anti-racism strategy in conjunction with Roger Klein. And that led to one part of that was the No More Tick Boxes Fair Recruitment Evidence report. And through that, I think I became more educated about what being anti-racist meant, and it affected a lot the work and the discussion that we had in our organisation as we signed up to that strategy, implementing that strategy. But one person alone, can't bring about change, even at the senior level, a board level. You need to build alliances, and you need to have allies, and you need to have other people taking accountability and responsibility at the senior level. And a really important programme for us has been a transformational reciprocal mentoring programme, which started about a year ago, working with Professor Eden Charles. And that is a kind of a different take on mentoring, and it involves quite a number of other board members in the trust, other executive directors, including the chief exec, and it has really transformed the way of understanding and the level of curiosity and discussions at a board level around racism in the trust and our work on ED&I. So all of these things, the reason for pulling them out is because they created a set of conditions where when the network and where these issues were raised, we were in the frame of mind to take accountability, I guess, for our previous decision making and to want to act to change it.
So what we started to look at practically, the things that we could tangibly talk about was how did we take accountability within the trust. As Oonagh said, we kind of went to the networks, we spoke to people within the networks, we listened to what they said, right? Which links into hearts and minds. And what they were telling us were their poor experiences. Because when they were talking about, look, we came over, we're being put at this lower banding, and now we can't even meet some of our basic needs, right? And Oonagh and I took this back to our senior leadership team meeting and kind of spoke about, okay, what are the things that we practically need in order to take action? And so Oonagh in her wisdom started to kind of dish out things for people to do within the team. So she asked the recruitment head of recruitment to kind of go and look at how many nurses had come over, how many, not just nurses, how many employees we had brought over from different countries around the world, and start to find out where we had placed them on the banding and what experience they had had prior. And then, so those real practical things, right? What banding were some of the nurses on who were trained in the UK? What level of banding would they put on if they had had similar experience? And then we started to look at how could we confidently act on the things that we were doing when we got the evidence and we put the evidence together. And we started to look at putting terms of reference together. So of course we needed to kind of understand how far would we go back if we did find that we weren't treating people well in terms of paying people. And then Oonagh took it to the board. We got some approval from the board, but again, I'll go back to the conditions that Oonagh spoke about earlier, because we had kind of started preparing, talking about inclusion, talking about transformational work within the organization. The board was already kind of on board. So all we needed to do was prepare all our recommendations, look at all of the things that we had found, the practical evidence, and they were happy to approve it. And so we got commitment to make things right.
We went through a look back exercise, decided on a cutoff date that was a reasonable cutoff date. I think we went back a couple of years, we went back to 2021, maybe even 2020. We identified all of the staff, we got the recalculations done. We used the Agenda for Change rules about what experience places you on which point in the scale. And then we wrote to all of the individuals to apologise for the error and for not properly recognising their experience and made the back payment. But we also publicised what we've done. We talked about it at briefings because we thought it was an important exercise in being accountable and in saying that we got something wrong, and when you get something wrong you need to admit that you've got it wrong and rectify it. So we thought it was a good case study to do that. Wherever you put a cut-off point with pay, there's always people that will feel aggrieved, or you've always caused some issue, but we did go back further, and actually 60,000 plus, wasn't it? But what helps, the chief finance officer was on the reciprocal mentoring programme and is one of the biggest. His whole perspective has shifted. I don't think he might be saying that since being on that programme.
That's and so fantastic.
Therefore, I meant it wasn't, and part of that was about shifting, having broad accountability for these types of issues, not just sitting with the director of workforce, but wanting to feel that it was a shared kind of accountability. And everything is far from perfect in our trust, and there are many, many other issues. But I have certainly felt personally, and I know Onika has as well, that change to a much more aware board because of that programme. Onika, you received a lot of feedback, and I think the important thing was, whilst obviously financially this made a big difference, what came through was that finance is one part of it, but the feeling of being heard and valued and having apologised had as much impact for a number of them as the money, because they felt that their experience was properly acknowledged and valued. And, you know, the NHS is a highly professionalised organisation, isn't it? With and in those areas, people have a real pride in their previous experience, and not feeling that your experience is rated as good as somebody else's just because it was in a different organisation, a different country, really hurts. So these are some of the comments that came back from staff. And you can see that reference to feeling valued.
And what's really also interesting is that the thing that we did, they called it kind. So it wasn't even, they acknowledged that it was kind, but we were just rectifying a wrong, is what I'm trying to say.
And when we looked at why we had decisions were made about which point people were placed on, of course, we found that it was all sorts of different judgments being made at the time. But I think underlying that was that concept that the training wasn't as good, or the experience wasn't as good, wasn't as relevant. And so basically, as we talked about, racist in its origin. So it's just a very small thing, but it's a practical example of how a number of interventions or work in this area come together to put you in the right place with the level of awareness and understanding to make the right decisions.
What's happened at board, Marianne, too, is the shift in mindset. So now they're more curious. They don't just say, okay, when someone brings something. They ask more questions. I realize that they ask more questions, and they don't just take the surface level responses. They go deeper. And they don't leave it until they get something that they're satisfied with. Don't feel bad. Just make it right if you can, and apologize. I think, once you act, Oonagh and I say the same all the time, Dr. Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, you do better. Now you know, just make it right. Every day is a learning day. Every single day. And I'll go back to what both Geeta and Dom said. How prepared are we to have different people within our organizations? Just how prepared are we? We need to constantly keep checking to see if we have it right at every stage, because with different, we have staff from India, Nigeria, different places need different things, and so we have to have that cultural competence. We're also doing some work around cultural competence in Cambridge and Peterborough. So
start referring to people by their name and not just calling them an overseas. And I think it's, for me, it's about seeing people as individuals with kind of properly listening, because I think when you take a tiny bit of time to listen to what people's backgrounds and how they've arrived and what they're doing to coming into a new place, studying to get your OSCE, adapting. I mean, it's mind-blowing. This, so once you take a bit of time to listen, and that's at every level, at board level as well. We did some board staff stories that really affected, because you got underneath. So taking the time to treat people as individuals is, rather than lumping people into groups.